I need to start this review with a poignant memory from my childhood. It was the early 90s and my parents had bought me a copy of Your Sinclair magazine, something that they very rarely did, and on the demo cassette for that issue was a game called Turbo The Tortoise. I fell in love with this demo. As a kid with a Spectrum who adored the arcades for their bright, colourful graphics and snappy gameplay, combined with my love of platformers at the time, and I longed for a game as responsive and addicting as Mario Brothers. For me, Turbo the Tortoise was the game I'd been dreaming of. I must have begged my parents for weeks and months on end to get me a copy. It's almost Christmas, they would say, maybe you'll get it then. But I couldn't wait. It was the end of summer and Christmas was 1,000 lifetimes away. I wanted Turbo the Tortoise. I needed Turbo the Tortoise. Then one day, while playing through the demo for the 1,000th time, my mum walked through the door and handed me a small W.H. Smith's carrier bag. My eyes bright and wide as I pulled out the cassette tape. Turbo was mine. For the next 2 days, I played the game endlessly, breezing through those first segments that were found on the demo tape and striving ever forward. Then, on the third day, on loading the game, disaster. My beloved Spectrum had taken my game and chewed it into ribbons. I had lost my beloved Turbo. My heart was broken. I would never want to play another game for as long as I lived. But then Christmas came around and I got a SNES with Super Mario Brothers, so I soon got over it. Now, finally, after all of these years, I get to return to the game that was so cruelly taken away from me. The first level came back to me instantly. It's half-tinted yellow and blue was all the original demo actually took me through, and I must have played through it about 5 times a day for at least a month. The sprites are chunky and detailed, and while the colour palette is never anything more than a solid mess, it does a good job of conveying the environment that you're currently in. My memories of Turbo were that the platforming, jumping and stomping on enemies were just as good as those of Mario Brothers. I was convinced of this as a kid. Sadly, that's not particularly the case, but it does have a pretty damn good go at it. When you do hit an enemy right, Turbo bounces on them perfectly and you can follow the trajectory of tougher enemies and it'll give you a satisfying double bounce death that games like Mario pull off so well. The trouble is mostly down to the hit detection. If you're off or come in from a certain angle, your hit won't be detected. My biggest grievance with the combat, however, is the lack of communication when it comes to what can and can't be killed or what can and can't hurt you. Cavemen are perfectly good fodder for a stomping, but bulldogs? Are you mad? You can't damage a dog. This gripe spills over into the boss design as well. The bosses are pretty much the worst part of the game by a long shot. They have incredibly basic patterns which are incredibly simple to avoid, but their vulnerability is never communicated. If you try to stomp them at the wrong moment, you'll take damage. You can only stomp on them at very specific times, and you'll only find out when those times are through trial and error. And I really can't overstate how poor some of these bosses are. Check out this action-packed scene here. That boss is by far the worst one, but the others aren't much more difficult, and they don't particularly increase in difficulty the further on through the game you get. The health of the bosses increases with each level to the point of monotony by the final boss, but the patterns never get any more complicated. That's a lot of complaints so far, and I haven't even mentioned the annoying over-reliance of hidden platforms to get to secrets, or the lack of music throughout, because these overall are minor niggles. And because even with all of these complaints in mind, I still ended up really enjoying Turbo the Tortoise, even after all this time. There's just a lot of invention in Turbo. Each level takes place across a different time period, and with that comes new enemy sprites, new level designs, new obstacles, new level layouts, new power-ups. Some of these things are entirely superficial and they just amount to a simple sprite swap, but other times you'll come across a level with entirely new power-ups, and it's just for one level. They'll never appear again. And this is where I lead back into another complaint. The game is too short. It jams all of these ideas into such a small space that it just doesn't get the room to breathe, to explore any of the different elements that it throws at you. It's true that most of this video has been complaining about things that are wrong with Turbo the Tortoise, but this is probably indicative of my final thoughts on the game, and that is I wanted more of it. It gives you one of the closest approximations to a new, original, arcade-feeling platform game with nice, chunky cartoon graphics, and in 30 minutes, if that, it's over. Even the end screen is practically shoving you out of the door. Time's up, get lost. Turbo still holds a place in my heart for the brief period of time I was able to experience it as a kid. At the time it felt like the arcades had been brought home, not just with a crappy arcade port, but with an entirely new franchise. It does have flaws, some more glaring than others, but overall it's still fun and it's still varied, especially for the ZX Spectrum. It also sells for an incredibly high amount on eBay, so good luck getting hold of an official copy.